Welcome back to the show. Today we have Shana Francesca here, and she is a keynote speaker, consultant, and scholar of intentional and ethical leadership and living, as well as the founder and CEO of Consonate LLC. She believes we become infinitely more impactful as leaders and as humans when we understand the power of community and our role inside of it. So welcome to the show, Shana. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
So for our audience, don't forget, use the code podcast to get $100 off Corporate to Contract Core, which is my self-paced course on how to become a high-end freelancer where you can make more money and get more time in your life. Shana, talk to me a little bit about your business and what you're doing, okay? Because as a business podcast, it's really fun to kind of just start with that question and dive right in. You don't have to wait till the end to promote yourself.
Yeah. So what does it mean to be a scholar of intentional and ethical leadership and living? Great question. So I teach people, what does it mean to be an intentional and ethical human and an intentional and ethical leader? And really fundamentally, the answer to that is we have to understand what relationship is. We have to understand that in order for us to be alive, we exist as part of an ecosystem. Even our body is an ecosystem. Leadership is a relationship and the cultivation of life within an ecosystem, if you choose to do it intentionally and ethically, right? So ultimately, it's about us understanding that when we understand what relationship is, then we can intentionally foster that and create that in our life. And then we can enhance our life, enhance our joy, enhance our relationships. I mean, it just kind of just rolls on from there, right? Because when we understand what relationship is, then our whole life is able to be transformed. So that's what I do. Ultimately, I just teach people what relationship actually is, because I think for most of us, we weren't taught. And for many of us, we kind of fall into what we call relationship, but it's more like proximity than it is actual intentional relationship.
Ooh, can you expand on that part a little bit? The proximity versus intentional.
Yeah. I love to create that contrast for people. So then it sets off, oh, okay, now I understand. I might be understanding what she means. Okay, so relationship as I define it is the combination of curiosity, respect, and accountability. That's what creates intentional and ethical relationship, right? So without curiosity, there is no relationship whatsoever. If we're not curious to understand or learn more about someone or something, there's no relationship, right? Also, without respect balancing out curiosity, things can get weird, right? So curiosity without respect is intrusive, and respect without curiosity is uneducated. So think about if I just met you, we technically really did just meet, but if we were in real life, right? If I just came up after you gave me your name and I just touched your hair, right? I just started stroking your hair, right? That is weird. That is intrusive, right? You don't really know me. We're near each other. We just introduced ourselves, but there's no understanding of boundaries and what's okay with me, right? So respect requires us to get curious, understand someone's boundaries, and recognize that there are kind of societal boundaries in place that we need to honor and observe as well, right? And then without accountability, right? Accountability comes in to add the ethical part. So I define accountability as us taking responsibility for the impact of our actions, not our intentions, but the impact of our actual actions, right? It's a little tongue twister there. And then, right, in order to really take accountability, right, to take responsibility for the impact of our actions requires us to then again, get curious, learn more so that as we move forward, we are mitigating and eliminating the harm we caused, right? We're not doing that anymore. That's what really shows accountability. Accountability is not apologizing. Oftentimes, when we apologize, we are doing so in order to absolve ourselves of accountability, right? We're like, oh, I apologize. Let's move on. But that's extremely harmful because we haven't actually taken accountability. We haven't acknowledged the impact of our actions, taken responsibility, engaged in the learning and the curiosity necessary for that learning so that we can mitigate and eliminate that harm moving forward. So that's relationship, right?
Uh-huh.
Proximity is I know your name, I know some facts about you. So we know each other, but you don't actually know one another. And that's not really relationship. I say this all the time, and I think women especially can understand this. You can be married to someone and not actually be in a relationship with them. It's more proximity than relationship,
Mm,
right? And I think some women will immediately be like, okay, yeah, I can
yeah.
feel that,
Yeah.
right?
So when you do this, when you're speaking or in workshops, how do you really, I mean, you kind of talked about this, but like, let's get a little bit deeper. How do you
Yeah,
bring this in to create a transformation within that
yeah,
organization?
yeah. So when we start by talking about what relationship is, and obviously I'm not talking to them in quite so quickly defining something, right? We're taking much more time to work through these concepts. And we're really diving in deeper. I'm using metaphors, I'm using all kinds of literary devices in order to connect people to how is this important? How is this impactful? Why should you care? How does it transform your organization? Now, when it comes to an organization, when we're talking about relationship, like I said, leadership is relationship, right? And so we specifically dive into how that impacts your organization. When I look at an organization, a community, any group of living things, and say, okay, this is a community, right? In order for it to really function the way that it's meant to, in order for it to be a place that drives creativity and innovation, which is what drives profitability, right, inside of an organization, we have to understand what relationship is. And fundamentally, innovation is relationship, right? It is us. So let me explain what I mean by that. When we're looking at something to innovate or we're being creative, we are redefining the relationship between things, right? We're redefining that for our customers, for our clients, within a product, so on and so forth. We're redefining relationship is essentially what we're doing, right? And so again, I come back to it's all relationship. So again, we have to really understand that relationship is what ultimately drives our profitability. It drives our culture, it drives our innovation, it drives our creativity, it drives all of these things, right? And when we are deeply invested in a relationship, our people can show up as their full selves, their full thriving selves, and contribute to our organization's thriving.
Mm. There's a lot here that I feel
Yeah.
like you really extract if you're doing a workshop that you can get
Yeah.
really deep on
Oh,
because
for
a
sure.
lot of these
Yeah.
concepts are actually kind of, I don't want to say new. It's almost like you've always known it,
Yes.
but
No one
it's
gave it
just
the language
lingering.
before.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
lingering there in the back. Like, yeah, I like obviously, but why have I
Yes.
never thought of it like this? Right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. That's the thing about my work is that I work so hard to give language to something that, again, like you said, I think we've always felt or known, but we didn't know how to express it. And when you give something language is when it has power, right? When you can explain it, when you can talk about it, that's when it has power. And so by giving voice to what relationship actually is, it becomes really, really powerful in our lives. Giving people the language to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm looking at. This becomes the criteria for how I'm showing up and how I'm empowering others to show up around me, and so on and so forth. Right? This is what begets community. This is what begets healthy culture. This is what creates a bubble of life. And not to like nerd out completely, but there's this definition that I'm absolutely obsessed with when I was looking for in like the way that I would help leaders to engage with what are we creating here? What is actually engaging in relationship create for an organization? And I was desperately seeking the language. I'm like, I can feel it in my bones, but I just don't know how to say it yet. And I found National Geographic's definition of an ecosystem. And I'm paraphrasing here, but this is essentially it. I pretty much memorized it at this point. It is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, along with the weather and the landscape, work together to form a bubble of life, right?
Oh.
So it's a diverse array of beings working together, supported by the landscape and the weather to create a bubble of life. Now, I posit through my workshops, through my talks, we dive into this, that leadership drives culture and drives the culture, which would be the weather, right? And provides the landscape, which is this foundational vision and support to create and foster that bubble of life.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Or it's not an analogy, the definition, I guess.
Definition.
Yeah, that you stumbled upon. Yeah, that's
I mean, it
really
becomes
cool.
kind of both, but it's just so powerful because when we as leaders can say, okay, I'm recognizing leadership as a relationship, which it's never been talked about that way, right? And then I'm understanding what relationship requires, and then I'm understanding what it empowers, right? Now it becomes a really powerful thing that we understand all the way through what we're creating, what we're fostering, and why it's important.
I like that a lot. So how did you even get into this line of work? I mean, did you go to business school?
No.
Did you start studying leadership out of
Yes.
just this desire? Or was it like in an instant that happened to you that you're like, this is horrible leadership. I'm going to find out how leadership can be better.
Kind of combination of 2 and 3. Okay, so I was born into an abusive household and raised inside of an evangelical Christian cult, right? So both are high control environments, right? And in those high control coercive environments, because they encompassed my entire life. So when I was at home, high control cult-like environment, right? Cult environment, leader who has ultimate control over everyone inside of the family through coercion, through manipulation, through violence. Then outside of my life, I went to the school and the church that was the cult, right? And then my house.
Wait, hold on. Did you go to a public school, or
no.
Was it okay?
No,
okay.
So the school was part of the cult.
Okay, that's what I was trying to ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were just like 24/7 part of this cult. Okay.
Yeah, 24/7. I was in coercive, abusive environments. And so the thing you learn and come to understand pretty quickly is that curiosity is a direct threat to systems of oppression. Because in those systems of oppression, you are only allowed to show up one way. It is only invested in you showing up one way. And that one way changes based on who's in, how the person in power defines it, based on their current desires and needs for your output. But it's always singular and as defined by them, but also at the same time, completely confusing and unattainable. And so you learn that you have to hide your curiosity or kill it off, literally, in order to survive. You have to dissociate. You have to release connection to your actual self, because your true self is not safe in the world. And so you do not want to bring your true self into the world. And so when I left at 26, I didn't yet have the language I have now to describe it as a cult. I just knew if I stayed, I wasn't going to survive.
How did you even come to this decision to leave? I know this is not the point of my podcast, but now
I know.
now you're like, wow, this is interesting,
well,
right?
It's important to understand, because I think anything can be a coercive environment. Anything can be a cult-like environment. We see that with organizations like WeWork, right? And so I think it's a valuable conversation, even when we're talking about leadership in business, right? Ultimately, my father left at 24. And so I had just graduated college the year before that. And I had gone to school for interior design specifically so that I wouldn't have to go to a high control religious school either. I had specifically chosen, I was like, of all the things I want to do, let me do this, because then I don't have to go to this particular type of school.
And your parents were okay with that then?
No, my mom was, my dad was not. But I had to commute. I wasn't allowed to stay on campus. Okay. So I commuted. Yeah. So there was still control over my personhood significantly. And I also still had to work a full-time job because my dad wouldn't sign loans for me to go to school. There's a whole book in here, guys. And don't worry, I'm writing it.
Okay.
But yeah, so then when my father left at 24, about a year later, my parents are going through the divorce. My grandfather got sick. My mom's dad. With lung cancer, and he needed someone to stay with him throughout the week because his kids could go on the weekend, but they had their own families, right? And it was like, can someone come and live with him? And I got a job right by him in King of Prussia, 3 miles away, and I lived with him Monday through Friday. And when I tell you that he is one of the greatest loves of my life, before then we knew each other, but he was always the strong, quiet type. And so I hadn't really gotten close to him. But being in that environment, I think he knew that I needed support in a way and a sense of safety. I think he just knew. And he became this person who helped to ground me. He would ask questions with no judgment, right? He would sit there and say, whatever weird thing I just said because of growing up in this cult, he'd be like, interesting. Have you thought about X? And he would just leave it there. No
So
judgment.
he was not part of the cult.
No, no
Okay.
one in my family outside of my nuclear
Oh.
family was, right? And actually, we were very alienated from our extended family because of being part of the cult. And so, like, when I say I was completely isolated and leaving was also created further isolation in my life. It was very, very traumatic. But living with him until he passed away honestly became one of the best years of my life because I had emotional safety with a man who became a father figure that I had never had before, literally never. And it gave me a chance to learn to safely explore my intuition, to learn to trust, to learn how to trust, what verifies if someone is trustworthy, like all of these things that you should learn as a kid, but I hadn't had the opportunity to learn because no one in my life was trustworthy. Right?
I feel like he reawakened that curiosity. Yeah. That's what I'm hearing.
Did.
Like
he did.
Even just by saying those.
Yes. He let it be safe to be curious. He empowered me to be curious because he created safety. Right. And that's kind of the point of and you can now see like the through line between how I define relationship, right? Is curiosity, respect, and accountability, right? Because that creates safety in order for us to be able to show up as our curious selves because curiosity and hope are directly connected, right? So us reinvesting in curiosity in our life creates hope. And I felt that living with my grandfather. I had hope that my life could actually feel like a life, right? Could become a bubble of life rather than just where hope went to die. And so then when he passed, I moved out of the home I grew up in completely. And then was able to leave the cult and create some separation. And I'm not going to lie, it wasn't like overnight, all of a sudden I deconstructed and I understood everything. When I tell you that it took until I was 35, until 4 years ago, for me to really kind of, and even now still some things come up and I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that existed within my ideology that I needed to deconstruct. Like I still bump up against things. And I think there's still going to be things that come up maybe for the rest of my life of programming that is just inside of me that I don't even know is there. But around 29, I formed a book club and around learning because I really wanted to create community around supporting my education, supporting my curiosity, supporting myself because I didn't have any anymore.
Yeah.
And started doing, leadership research, started studying psychology, started studying all kinds of things around, everything from like Amy Cuddy's book, Presence, to like Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table, and Ed Catmull's book and Tony Hsieh's book on Zappos, and just reading all kinds of books on leadership and psychology in order to kind of understand how do we show up as human beings? Because I felt like I wasn't taught to be human. I was taught how to survive. I had to learn how to survive within capitalism, within systems of oppression inside of my life, right? And when I left and as I started to deconstruct, right, I started to recognize that there was reflections of those high control environments in our society at large. There was absolutely crossover beliefs and actions. Not to the same extreme, but there was absolutely through lines that I saw showing up in our culture that showed up in these high control environments. So it became my obsession for the last more than a decade is to understand relationship, to understand my relationship to myself, and how leadership can show up in a way that actually fosters life, and by fostering that life, drives innovation, which drives profitability.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot.
There was a lot in that I did not expect. Wow, that is a powerful story. And then it's how you use that many, many years of your life
Yeah,
to be a catalyst for this business that you have. Like
yeah,
that's I'm glad I asked that question because there's sometimes I skip that question or I cut it out if I see it, like if I read their bio, whatever, and I'm just like, there's not enough here for me to work with. I'll skip that question. But I didn't see enough on your stuff actually to find out how you got
yeah.
here. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to ask this question. I'm so glad I did. And it's very hard for me to go back to the topic at hand because there's so many questions I want to ask about your past, but I'm not going to. So let's I'm stuck now.
It's
All
okay.
right, that's okay. It's okay. We're gonna
Let's transition.
we're transitioning. We're transitioning.
Transition.
I like that. Should have this music all the time.
Right.
All right. So now that you're running your business, you're doing these workshops. How do you balance having that personal life within, which I'm sure you're still cultivating, you're still growing, especially after the story that you told, because you're trying to, I feel like, catch up on all these years, right?
Yeah.
So how do you have this personal life and grow a personal life, and make new connections, create a new community of your own, while also running this business?
Oh, that's easy and hard. So it's easy to answer. I realize that if I want my life to be a bubble of life, if I want innovation and creativity to be a constant in my life, then I need to be an active part of community. I need to be engaged in reciprocity with the living world around me, and that includes human beings, right? And so it is in community that I have found my way through healing and continue to find my way through healing. It is in community that I have found the support that I needed and continue to need in order to gain access to resources and get into the rooms that I don't yet have access to, or for people to see and understand my work in ways that I don't yet see or understand. I haven't even considered, right? Um, it has, it is an, it's an absolute. I have to be engaged in reciprocity with the world around me. I have to be engaged in cultivating beautiful relationships. As a matter of fact, back in the day, I'd started a small like networking dinner back when I was like 25 or 26. Oh my God, that was a long time ago. And I had let it go a couple of years before the pandemic because I didn't know what I wanted it to become, and I was changing so much. But I just re-engaged it, and actually, our first dinner is tonight, and it's just this amazing, diverse group of women. Emphasis on like again, bubble of life requires diversity. You cannot be surrounded with people who think like you, who have the same socioeconomic status, who have the same background and understanding of similar. There has to be diversity there. It has to be embraced and understood and valued and honored, right? So this incredible group of women, and we're having dinner tonight in order to just be ourselves, to just show up without having to be the polished, version of ourselves that shows up to networking events regularly, right? Like to just be able to be ourselves with one another and ask each other the questions that maybe we don't feel comfortable asking around others, to ask for the support, to provide the support, wisdom, to just laugh together, cry together, to just be together, just be. And so I've restarted that. I still have a book club. I have a dinner club. Like I have all these ways in which I cultivate interaction with like community around finding new ways to interact with the world, right? And doing it together, not just by myself, right? That's like the key, because I get to learn not just from my own perception of what just happened, but everybody else's too, right? And we get to have these discussions that I'm like, oh yeah, shoot, I didn't think about that. Yeah, oh wow, that's so cool, right? And so that's the thing that happens in community. Our little perspective gets continually expanded by the perspectives of those we surround ourselves with.
And then that changes your business and changes how you run your business, and you learn from others, which I also love. Similar to you, what I love about what you're saying, it's like you were looking for something that didn't exist. And so you created it yourself with the dinner club. And I've just done that recently. I was looking for a place for freelancers to come together and talk about issues that could be driving them, right? Their businesses, and not heavy on networking, just like, hey, where can we all come together? Didn't see anything. I was looking on like Eventbrite. I was looking on Meetup. I was just like, where is this like not a crazy networking event that's just like, hey, let's come together. So I created it. Now I do it twice a month, and I send out invites on LinkedIn and Meetup and
I love that.
Eventbrite, and I get to meet all these people, and we do something different. I make sure that there's like a theme for each section. I realized when there wasn't a theme, people were just like not showing up. But it's like, it's something that I want our audience to think about. It's like, if you don't see what you want out there and you're looking for it, create it yourself. You know, like if you want a book club that's specifically this genre and this subgenre, right? Create it. Like that is something. Or if you're looking for a book club that maybe it's more intense, like, you know, there's some book clubs you go to and like it ends up dissolving after 10 minutes. No one's talking about the book anymore and everyone's having coffee and like cookies.
Well,
you don't want like that.
We talk about the book for like 10 to 20 minutes. I think the longest we've ever talked about the book is half an hour. Even really important books, right? Like we'll talk about the book for as long as that takes us. And then we spend time with one another, right? Because we want to hear each other's perspective on things, but we also just want to be with each other. Yeah.
I know. I've been to a few like that. And I was just thinking, like, sometimes I remember someone saying to me once, they're like, oh, I went to this book club. And it was very similar to that. It was just about my experience, but they were like, I wanted something more like we have questions and we have to answer those. And then we sit in a circle. And I was like, shoot. Yeah. So she went and
like
created
a book
it.
Report.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, like no one had to write it down, but it sounds like she had created something where like she sends out these questions in advance and each person goes down the line. And just, but again,
that's more like how I conduct group coaching. That's how I do group coaching. I'm like, here's our questions, here's our understanding, right? Like, so to me, that's just funny. I guess the distinction of this, you know, in my life already is this is how I do group coaching. So I don't do book club that way.
But the takeaway is really create what you can't find and what you want. And then you create this sense of community that is important to you. Now, what are some effective time management techniques you can share with other women entrepreneurs?
I mean, the most important is especially as like a small business owner, is what's going to help make money and move our specific intentions forward, right? There are lots of things to do, but how are we moving forward? Connecting with our clients, finding out what their needs are and meeting those needs, and also making money because we have to keep the doors open, right?
Yes.
Right. And so like for me, it's always establishing those. It comes back to establishing intentions, right? And saying, okay, this is how I want to show up. Relationship is important to us. We're going to keep that at the focus of everything. We're going to stay curious, right? And continually be connecting with the world around us, you know, kind of seeing and understanding how this work connects to what's going on in the world and what people need, the questions they need answered, and the things that are holding them back from the most successful version of themselves or their organization. So those things stay at the top. Everything else is kind of like, can we give this to someone else? Can we, do we have to do this thing, right? If it's all the way at the bottom of the list, doesn't mean it isn't valuable or important, but it might wait a few weeks, right? Like if there's a presentation a big presentation I have coming up, or a keynote coming up, that's going to take priority over, okay, well, somebody asked me to write this article, right? And the article is important because it helps with marketing and it's free marketing. So of course we're going to do it, right? Of course I'm going to do it. I'm going to write it. But and also like podcasts, also an important, valuable thing. But I might have to, if I've got a strict deadline, I might have to ask the podcast host, can we postpone this a week? Right? Because it's really important. I love being on podcasts. I think it's an incredible way to learn to hone your message, to learn how to tailor your message to specific audiences. You know, you get immediate feedback from podcast hosts on whether on efficacy, whether or not you're communicating things well and you're communicating them in a concise manner, but not too concise. It can't be too concentrated, right? Like there's all this amazing things that happen being a guest on podcasts. But if we've got a paying client, that takes priority, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of being willing to give yourself grace and be willing to ask for the help that you need, right? And saying, hey, is it okay if I reschedule this thing, right? And so I just established that. And I think it's just super normalized in my life. It's that way with my friends as well. You can cancel us getting together up until like the minute I leave the house. If you say, I'm not feeling well, I thought I would be up for this. I'm just not. I don't even need a reason. You just say, hey, can we reschedule? As long as I haven't had left the house, I'm probably not going to be very annoyed. I'll be like, fine, okay. Because I don't make it about me. I make it about the relationship. I make it about what that person needs, and they're asking for what they need, and I'm going to honor that, right? And so it's the same for myself. Is I'm going to honor what I need and what the business needs, and extend grace and kindness along the way.
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk about the prioritization and what's bringing you money.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot from the people I have on my podcast. It's like, focus on what is the income generating, right? What's income generating? Because at the end of the day, that is your business.
Yeah. And it's so funny to me because like consulting and coaching and keynote speaking are like the top 3 buckets. It's like consulting and keynote speaking, right? And then like coaching, because I don't focus on the coaching, but people ask me to coach them. So it's there and I do it and I love it, but it's not something I focus on. And then, I do my workshops, and my workshops are a great revenue generator. And I also provide them like discounted through the website, right? And it's so funny because I thought, oh, all they're my condensed workshops and people are going to love them. Well, people started asking me for a workshop I didn't even deliver, like I hadn't even created. And that has become my most profitable workshop, was when I never even considered creating, right? So again, I think it's like focus on the things that are revenue generating, but also listen to your clientele and potential clientele, because they're probably telling you things that they would love to see from you that will generate incredible amounts of revenue for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you get most of your clients through referrals and word of mouth, or is it organic marketing as well?
It's both. I've had people come and do my workshops or hire me because of hearing me on podcasts, or seeing an article I've written, but mostly through like podcasts. And then definitely in real life, I'm networking all the time. It's word of mouth. It's referral based. I'm great at building relationships. If you can get me in the door, I'm great at building that relationship. It's just, it's that hard part of sometimes, getting in the door. But it's like the warm introduction kind of cheats the relationship a little bit, right? Because you're kind of piggybacking off of someone else's relationship with that organization, which makes it so much easier.
Yep. So you mentioned a little bit about what can you hand out, and in terms of delegation, you also said off air that you have project subcontractors that come in and out. What mistakes or challenges have you had hiring as you've tried to scale your business?
So I had an executive assistant and my very first executive assistant. She's an amazing, lovely person. However, I did not spend enough time figuring out whether or not we really spoke the same language or could figure out how to get on the same page. So it was a struggle for the almost 2 years that she was my assistant in learning how to communicate with one another, because we seemingly just spoke 2 different languages entirely. And I think it became very frustrating at times for both of us, because it just, even though we liked each other as human beings, it just didn't work. We couldn't figure out how to speak the same language in a way that was like productive, without, and I say productive, I don't love that word because the focus is not that. But there are things that we need to get done. And if I'm having to explain how to do them so many times because we're just not understanding each other, it becomes very unproductive, unhelpful for us both. So that was definitely a lesson, was like, do we kind of like listening to how somebody listens to what I'm saying, listening to how they interpret what I'm saying. I got better at that with my second assistant, who really ended up being like project manager. She's an incredible human being. So, I think you can really like someone, and that doesn't mean you have to hire them. Right? Like that's the lesson I had to learn really, really quickly. And just because you hire someone and you like them doesn't mean that you aren't going to have to let them go because it just doesn't work out. Right.
And there's
Yeah.
something to be said about communication styles and
Yeah.
how the brain interprets directions and
Yeah.
things like that, because I know that feeling where it's like, what am I doing wrong? I don't understand. Or
Yeah.
like I think keep thinking we're on the same page with the
Yeah.
client. Just is not right. So
Yeah.
um I and you can be good at what you do,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And just there's this
Yeah.
breakdown. It's just this
Yeah. And I
breakdown.
think it's so funny because when I hired my project manager, um, I felt like it could have been great if like if I like Lauren and I would meet, we would talk about what needed to be done, and then she would delegate to my assistant. Like that chain probably would have been much more productive because I think Lauren more spoke my assistant's language than I did, and understood how to translate between the two of us. But then that also kind of would put her in the position of being kind of like monkey in the middle, and that just doesn't feel fair. But it was kind of an interesting thing. I was like, oh yeah, that probably once we created that flow of conversation, things got clarified, but it still was not like a sustainable way.
Mm. So can you please think about one real big action that you took you think that really helped scale your business?
Being on podcasts. And for not the reasons that you think. It's not like I went on podcasts and all of a sudden money came pouring in. Absolutely not. That is not what happened. I have gotten 2 speaking engagements through podcasts. Um, but what it has done continuously help empowering me to hone the language. I think about it this way. When you think about a comedian, they don't just wake up and have a tight 10, right? They go to every bargain basement, every retirement community, every hole in the wall bar, right? Every divey kind of laugh house. And they are in comedy club, right? And they are trying out and testing out this material. They're honing it. They're seeing what's working. They're tweaking, so on and so forth. Podcasts function in that way. And public speaking in general, it helps to establish you as a subject matter expert, right? People are seeing more of your name. If you Google my name right now, there are pages, hundreds and hundreds of results because I've been on over 130 podcasts. I've written over a dozen articles, right? So there's, besides the other organic stuff, social media accounts and YouTube videos and so on and so forth, and presentations I've given. There is so much there, right? With backlinks to who I am that exists in the world that give people an understanding of like who I am as a person, so much information that they can dive into and learn more about me. So that's really grown my business significantly and helped establish me as a subject matter expert. I already was one. I just needed everybody else to know that. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it does is it takes your subject matter expertise from being like something that only you know about so that the world can know about. And podcasting absolutely did that for me is really, really helped me to hone that language and feel confident in how I was bringing information to the world.
Yeah, there's 2 things about podcasts that I want to say briefly. And like one is what you're saying. Like I have had people come on my podcast that I'm like, feel like a little bit bigger of a name. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I'm so flattered that you want to be on my podcast. They're like, I have a new offer and I need to really figure out what I'm saying about it. And same thing, like they need to figure out how to say it in a way that doesn't go on for hours and hours.
Even for 3 minutes. Yeah. Like even for 3 minutes, they need to figure out how to tell that story really powerfully, very quickly. Yeah.
Right. I have people come on who are in training to be speakers.
Yeah.
On keynote speakers or speakers on stage, and they need to also just practice speaking, practice engaging, practice interviews and stuff like that. Yeah. So they come on podcasts. And then I wanted to point out the interesting thing about podcasts. You said you only got 2 clients from it, but what people might not realize is like the longevity of a podcast episode.
Oh my God, I know. Oh my God, that's such a great point.
Different. Yeah, it's so different than social media, right? Like a podcast is there for a long time. And like you said with the backlinks, you can pull up an episode from 4 years ago and find it and listen to this person and get to know them. I might cringe
when I listen to myself from 2 years ago. I might be like, oh, wow, I really hadn't honed that language yet.
Yeah, but for a potential client, they get to kind of know you. Yeah. And I've had people reach out to me about podcast episodes that I've been on, like I think once was like 9, 10 months prior. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, cool. I'm
Wow.
so glad you
Yeah.
stumbled upon that and you learned about me. And now they were like, and now I'm going to be following your podcast and learning more about it. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's like, and that was, if that was a social media post, that's
Yeah,
gone.
no,
Like,
it's
not,
buried. It's buried.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And
No
that's the
one sees
thing.
that.
Yeah, most podcasts, unless they shut down the website and unless they shut down like app, like wherever it's posted, Apple, Spotify, whatever, unless they shut all of that down, it's going to live on the internet
Mm-hmm.
forever. Right. And so that's why I tell people like, when your first foray into podcasting, pick a podcast with less than 20 episodes to test out how comfortable you are being interviewed. Because
Oh,
it has
good
less
point.
than 20
Interesting.
episodes, because you know that most podcasts fail in the first season. And most
Yes.
podcasts, first season is like 20 episodes or less. So if they have less than 20 episodes, that podcast is probably listened to by like 3 people, unless it's like already funded and backed. Be careful. Look
Right,
at that
right.
in the description, right? Who it's put out by, et cetera, et cetera. But if it's just a singular person hustling to create this podcast, you probably have, a couple of people who are listening to it in the first season, including their mom and their best friend, right?
Yeah.
So like it's gonna be okay. Give yourself grace and just like, do the podcast. And I mean, I gotta tell you, when I first started doing podcasts, I think there's probably 2 or 3 at least that I can think of right now, podcast episodes that I recorded and never got published. Like
Oh,
never even made it to the light of day because it was their first season and they didn't realize they just recorded a bunch of episodes and didn't realize the production required, how much effort and so on. So they never even made it to the light of day, right?
yeah.
And I look back and I think, but they were good interviews. I felt really good about them. I wish they had, but it's okay because like that was me still working on my tight 10, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't really, it's okay, right? And so I have people, think about it that way. It's just go on a podcast in its first season. Probably no one will ever hear it anyway. Give yourself grace, test it out and see how it goes and go from there.
I love that you're giving that advice
Yeah.
because as a podcaster, I remember the struggle of getting people to come
On your
on.
season. Yeah.
Right, right. When you don't have any episodes yet.
You're
And you know what
both
I
nervous.
started? Yeah, what I started doing is when I would pitch people to come on, I didn't even tell them I didn't have episodes yet, or I had a few.
Yeah, of
I would
course
just say,
not.
hey, do you want to be on my podcast? It goes into this. And when I pitched it about supporting women and giving
Yeah.
advice, I got way more people interested.
Yeah,
And then they
of course.
didn't even look
They
up
didn't
my
know.
podcast.
No.
They didn't even look up to see how
No.
many I had. And I was like, great. So once I
Or they
changed
did
that
and they didn't
angle-
care. Or they did and they
Maybe.
didn't care. Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. But once I changed that angle, I was like, oh, I got way more. But I love that you're giving that advice because it was a
Yeah.
struggle in the beginning. Now I can say I'm
Yeah.
nearly 100 guests and I
Yeah.
think I'm almost at 100. So it's like, it's really nice to be
Yeah.
able to just smoothly go past that.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
Let's talk briefly about when you're balancing spending your business money, making business money, obviously both. What do you think have been some of the best and worst investments you've made with your business money?
Oh, this one hurts. I literally just posted an email. I just did an email blast about this or put it together to go out this month, talking about how much money I spent on marketing and on marketing consultants in the first 2 years. I spent like 20 grand and it did absolutely nothing for my business.
I know marketing is hard. It's hard. No, I know.
It did absolutely nothing. So what's so funny is now, so I've paid more than 10 grand to 2 different marketing agencies to build a website for me. And neither of those websites exist. The one that exists now, I built for myself.
Oh my goodness, really?
Yeah. It's a whole long story we don't have time for, but ultimately I was like, F this. And I just built it for myself. And so I'm like so gun shy now about hiring anybody to do anything with a website. People constantly reach out and I'm like, nope, I'm okay. I'm fine. No. I've got it. So I did that and then I paid for marketing in bizarre ways. There's a lot of marketing companies that reach out and they're like, we'll market your business in this specific geographic area, this county, or this service, so on and so forth. Like House does that. Like there's some, because I was still doing interior design work when I
Okay.
started my business, right? So like there's certain organizations that are like, we'll push your business out to this geographic area. And magazines will also do that. So like certain magazines, subscriptions that say, okay, well, we'll have you do an article, but it'll only be regional. You're going to pay this $2,000 to have this article and so on and so forth. I learned pretty quickly that none of that really brings you any business. So it's great if you want to do it, but it's not actually going to bring you any business. I have paid to sponsor events, hoping that, I would get to, network and meet some potential clients there. That never turned into any business. I think ultimately what you have to do is establish yourself as a subject matter expert, and that doesn't really cost that much money or anything at all. I think I've
Takes
spent
time though.
takes
I
time,
think people
lots of
hope
time.
that like by investing in marketing firms, they skip a bunch of steps. And sometimes it works. Like I think for
Sometimes,
product-based
but most times, no.
businesses,
Yes,
oh,
product-based businesses, yes. Consulting-based businesses, no. It's not going to work. It's not going to work, and it's just not. And I learned that very, very quickly. So for me, it was buckling down and realizing this was a time commitment, and I was going to dedicate that's how I ultimately, decided to build my brand, as we were just talking about. But yeah, I spent tens of thousands of dollars that essentially were flushed down the toilet because I was trying to bypass the time it takes to build yourself up as a household name, as a subject matter expert. And you really can't, especially if you want your business to have long-term growth. You
yeah.
cannot bypass those initial moments because that's when you're setting down roots. That's when you're growing roots deep, right? In those moments of figuring things out, right? And learning, where your expertise really fits and what clientele really resonate with it. And so you can't bypass all of that because then
Yep.
it's going to control you rather than you intentionally moving through with your business, right? Now everything's going to be dictated to you. And then it becomes this runaway train. And then when that one singular avenue of business dries up, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So don't try to hack it. Be committed and be patient.
So is that like do you consider that the biggest mistake you've ever made in your business, or is there another one
For
that you could
sure.
say like, okay,
I would say, well, and then I would say personally, me thinking that I had to rely on my interior design degree, oh, like that's how I had to show up in the world. That's the medium I had to use for these conversations. Because I was still having these conversations with people about what relationship is and their relationship to their physical environment. And so they were very powerful conversations, but they all kind of ended up with me creating these physical environments for people. And once I removed that barrier in my mind of interior design is how the medium I have to use, right? And I opened it up and it became consulting and speaking and workshop facilitation. And I opened that up and shifted away from interior design and let myself release it. I wish I had done it sooner. I really do,
mm,
because um, I, I think I would have been able to grow things differently if I had been able to release that sooner. But it is what it is.
so on that note, what advice do you have for women who are looking to scale their business?
For me, I mean, I've chosen to bootstrap my business. I know other people who, especially when they have like products or specific services, they've been able to get investors and um, establish large lines of credit and so on and so forth to help build their business. I've done neither. I've just bootstrapped the entire thing. It just, again, it just kind of came back to being intentional and staying curious the whole time. What's working, what's not working, being willing to fail and fail quickly and move on and not make myself bad or wrong. I just didn't know what I know now. I failed, I learned, I needed to move forward. And by doing that, by redefining failure, because I now define failure this way. Failure is me recognizing I have reached the edge of my understanding of my learning or what I previously thought myself capable of,
Mm.
right? Fear and failure kind of go hand in hand. They're kind of my definition of both, really. um, and so when I get to that place where I have failed or I'm running up against fear, I know that I have to just learn more, get more curious, invest in the relationships around me, ask for help, so on and so forth. Asking for help and surrounding myself with a community is the way that I built my business as quickly as I have, as soon as I let go of interior design 3 years ago and shifted. In the last 3 years, my business has grown exponentially because number one, I let go of limiting beliefs. Number two, I invested in I could show up as my full self and form community around myself in more authentic ways and could actually ask for help that people could give me, right? Because they felt powerfully connected. They're like, now, yes, okay, this is what you're meant to be doing. Now I can help you, right? And so, the staying curious part, I think, and building community have really been what's pushed my business forward exponentially. And it goes back to that like very trite saying that like your net worth is determined by your network. It's very, very true. It's very, very true.
This has been so helpful. I really appreciate, Shana, your time. Can you share with our audience where they can find you? If anyone wants to connect with you to discuss more with you, what you have talked about, what's the best way to do that?
Definitely email me. It comes right to my in-bin. I'm the one who's checking it. So it's Shana, Shana, at consonate.world. Consonate is spelled Concinate. And my website will be tagged in the show notes, so don't worry about remembering how to spell it. You can find all my contact information on my website. It's consonate.world. You can subscribe to be part of my email list. It just goes out once a week. It's usually stories about me and how I got where I am and revelations I'm having or a new article or a podcast that I've been on. So just, authentic sharing and interesting information. So you can subscribe to that. That's the best way to reach out to me.
I wanted to ask you, and this is a good place to ask you what consonate means. I looked it up and I love it. And I want you to share why you picked that word.
Oh, gosh. I actually have this story on my website because I love the name so much. And I spent 2 years trying to find the right word when I decided to rebrand my business. And I'm looking down because for those of you who are watching this on video, because I wanted to bring it up on my phone. It means to arrange or blend together skillfully as parts or elements, put together in a harmonious, precisely appropriate, or elegant manner. And when we are truly and deeply invested in relationship and in reciprocity with the world around us and with ourselves, it becomes something where we can be truly intentional and our life becomes something that is harmonious and precisely appropriate for us. And it just becomes a really beautiful way of showing up as our authentic selves and empowering others to do the same.
I love that. Yes. I wish I brought that up earlier, but when you were saying,
it's okay.
like, email me at consonate, I was like, oh my God, I wanted to ask about this. This is such a good word.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a real word too. Definitely real.
Oh, it is. But it's funny. When I was looking up the pronunciation yesterday, my Google autocorrect kept changing it to Cincinnati.
Cincinnati. Yeah.
And I was like, stop it. No, that is not what I want.
I know. It's like, you do not want that. And I'm like, yes, I do. I really do. Yeah.
So please share with us, what is one philosophy, mantra, or quote you try to run your business by?
Yeah, it sits above my desk, so I can literally read it from here. There's this Maya Angelou quote that I really, really love that kind of helped to transform the way I see myself in the world and the way I want to be able to empower others. And through the business is, you are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high and the reward is great. And I think when we sit with that, there's so many layers of meaning and things to really be present with.
I like that one. I've never heard that one. Sometimes I hear similar ones, but this one's different. Can you say it one more time for us?
Yeah. You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high and the reward is great. And that's by Dr. Maya Angelou.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this interview, Shana. And if you're part of our audience and you're listening to this, and if you found Shana's interview just fascinating, please share it with someone you think who could also benefit from it. And until next time, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can tag me on Instagram if you want to continue the conversation at the Kiri Mohan. So thank you, Shana, again.
Thanks for having me.